Hi guys, this is Leela. Welcome to my channel Leela Web Dev. So in this video we will learn about the types of components. So the component categories. Normally we are creating the components in the React, right? So whatever the component we are trying to create in the React, so whatever the component it is, it comes under certain categories. So we should divide the components into a certain category. So each category should have a particular responsibilities. So let's try to learn about the component categories in React. Not only in the React, we can also say in Angular and Vue.js like this also, these component categories will come into existence. So let's try to learn about this one. So which we will be using more often in the React.js. So let's go into the slideshow here. Fine. So most of the components in the React will naturally fall into one of these three categories. So normally we have three categories. We have more than three categories in the React, but most oftenly we will be using these categories is these three only. So most of the components, almost all the components in the React will naturally fall into these three categories. What are those three categories are? First one is the stateless or presentational component. So stateless or presentational, whatever it may be. So we can call it sometimes as stateless or sometimes we can call it as an presentational. So presentational components, and the another one is stateful components, and the last one is structural components. So these are the three categories, component categories, which comes into the React. We can categorize the components into any one of the category when we think about the components. So normally the components we can categorize into any one of this category. So any component, whatever the component you are trying to create in the React, it will come under any of these categories when we think about the components. So there are also other categories, but I think these make the most sense. So as I already told you, right, other than these three types of categories, so there are also other categories also, but these are the three most things which makes more sense. So let's start with the stateless or the presentational component. So starting with the stateless or presentational component, so as the name itself says that these don't have any state. So the state means nothing but whatever the thing you are trying to create with the use state and all those things we are doing it, right? So the variables which we are trying to create, the pieces of state or state variables, so those all the things will not be existing in the presentational components. So that is the reason. So that is the reason, as the name itself suggests, that it doesn't have any state in that one. Usually they are components that receive some props and then they simply present the data or even some other content, and therefore the name presentational. So normally, so what it will try to do, these presentational components is that doesn't have any use state. So state variables doesn't have inside that one. So normally they receive the data through the props. So through the component it will receive the data through the props, and using those props it will try to show the UI, or otherwise it will try to show the data, or otherwise so it will have only the UI content. So you will be having only HTML content or something like that, which you will be showing it. So therefore we call it as in presentational also. So if you are having any HTML content created in a component and you want to show that component, means that doesn't have any state or we are not receiving any props, means so those are presentational thing. And normally we can also say that it will receive some props data. So using the props data, it will try to present the data. So these are called as stateless or presentational components. Many times these are small components such as the logo, num results. Num results means something like if you are showing a tabular data, you will be showing that, right, number of results found. So those type of components or those type of data we call it as in presentational components. So normally those are called as a logo like this. Next category comes is the stateful components. So as you already the name itself understands, you are able to understand, these are simple components that do have state. So which you will be having the state, means then these are called as in stateful components. Now just because these components have state, that doesn't mean that they can't be highly reusable. So don't think that. So these presentational components are highly reusable. You can use it wherever you want. Why? Because it doesn't rely on the external data. So just you need to pass some props data if it takes it, or otherwise there is no need to pass the props data also for presentational product. Whereas the stateful components, so here you will be having the state. So that means it depends on the state. So it will be having its own memory location or memory variables, state variables. So now you don't think that if it is having the state means we cannot reuse those things. So we can reuse those stateful components also. Now finally the last one comes is the structural components. Structural components, what I can say is these are page layouts or screens of the application. So these are called as structural components, which are often times the result of composing many smaller components together. Sometimes we can also say that structural components which comprises of smaller components together. We can say it as a structural components. So these structural components can be huge and non-reusable components. So these structural components are non-reusable components. So these can be huge one. So that is the thing. Sometimes the structural components are sometimes quite small too. So these structural components are sometimes quite small too. What matters is that they are responsible for providing some sort of structure to application, such as pages or the layout. So that is the main thing which I want to explain you. So these structural components, sometimes it can be huge or sometimes it can be quite small too. The main agenda what I want to tell you is, the main fundamental what I want to tell you is, these structural components define the structure of the application, like such as pages or the layout. Therefore, these components might not be present in really small apps, but you will definitely have a few structural components as your app grows bigger and bigger. So generally, if you try to see, the smaller apps will be there, right? So these smaller apps and all those things, you will not see these structural components, but you will definitely need to have a structural components when your app is growing bigger and bigger. So this is all about the structural components, stateful components and the stateless component. Just revise one more time. So there are three component categories available in the React.js, that is stateless or presentational components, and another one is stateful components, and the last one is the structural components. So these are the components which you generally create. So any component you are creating in the React.js means those things comes under any one of this category. So stateless category or presentational component, what I can say is, so these are the components that does not have any state. So that means use state, we will not use the use state state variables. So how it will be having the data is, so we need to pass the data through the props. So when you send the data through the props, using that props data, it will show that it will present that data in a tabular form or anything. Or otherwise it will not, if you don't pass any props also, if you are having any static HTML content, you want to show it you want to reuse that one in your application, means you will create a component with that reusable HTML content, and you will try to use that component wherever you want it. So those is called as a presentational component. So stateless or presentational component. And the other one what I want to explain you is the stateful component. So stateful component means nothing but you can also pass the props to that one, but it will have its own state. So whenever you are trying to create with the use state variables like that, so it will have its own state. So that is the reason it is called as a stateful components. So normally the stateful components also we can reuse it just like the presentational components also. So there is nothing to think that we cannot reuse the stateful components. We can reuse it. And the last one comes under the structural components, which in the bigger apps we will be able to see more often. So these define the structure of the application, like pages, layout or anything like that. So these structural components are not reusable. So these are not reusable. So these can be huge or sometimes it can be small also. In smaller applications or smaller React apps, you will not able to see these structural components. Whereas stateless and stateful components, commonly you will be able to see it. So these are the different types of component categories you will be able to see in the React.js. Hope you understood about these component categories. If you have any doubts or any suggestions, please post the comments below to this video. And if you like this video, please do support me by subscribing to my channel. Thank you.